There are moments in the history of civilizations when the fate of an entire continent hangs in the balance. We are accustomed to viewing the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 as the inevitable outcome of the clash between two worlds. Europe, with its steel, gunpowder, and germs, seemed an invincible force that was bound to sweep away the civilizations of Mesoamerica. In our textbooks, Hernán Cortés is the figure who set in motion the irreversible process of colonization that transformed Mexico into New Spain. However, this view ignores the fragility of the conquistadors' expedition itself. Spain's victory was based not so much on technological superiority as on the political mistakes of the Aztec leadership and a catastrophic combination of circumstances. Cortés did not defeat the empire alone. He exploited its internal divisions. But what if these divisions had been closed before the influx of foreigners? Let's imagine a scenario where Montezuma II and his successors make different decisions, where diplomacy proves sharper than obsidian and the biological threat is recognized in time. This is a story of how Mesoamerica did not fall, but adapted. A story about the birth of a new world power that managed to combine ancient traditions with old world technologies, building its own bridge across the Atlantic. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the history of the fall of the Aztec Empire could have changed. To understand how everything could have changed, let's look at the real picture in 1519. The Aztec Empire, or Triple Alliance, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, was at the height of its power, but that power was deceptive. At first glance, the grandeur of the metropolis seemed unshakable. A huge market, a complex system of aqueducts, a regular army, and a religious ideology that united the warriors. However, behind the facade of power lay deep social fatigue and an extensive network of discontent. The central government's power was based on fear, sacrifices, and tribute. The vast territory of the empire lived under the burden of military service, and dozens of conquered peoples surrounding the Valley of Mexico hated their rulers. The system of subjugation was unstable. Any crack in the center could cause a chain reaction of uprisings. The most dangerous neighbor for the Aztecs was the independent confederation of Tlaxcala, a united warlike state that the Aztecs never managed to conquer, despite decades of war. The Flower Wars, which were formally fought for ritual purposes, were in fact a struggle for influence, resources, and intimidation of neighbors. When Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, he brought with him not an invasion army, but rather a large reconnaissance detachment. About 500 men, several horses, a small detachment of arquebusiers, and a few light cannons. This force was insignificant compared to the resources of the empire. However, Cortés' main weapon was not the arquebus, but words, diplomacy, and the ability to manipulate the fears of the local peoples. He quickly realized that the Aztec Empire was held together by enmity and resentment, and began to turn this hatred into a tool. Cortés brilliantly exploited the mistrust and desire for revenge among the local tribes. The Totonac tribes, and later the Tlaxcalans, saw in the Spaniards an opportunity to overthrow the domination of Tenochtitlan. As a result, a handful of Spaniards became the core of a 100,000-strong Indian army, an army that was effectively fighting for its own liberation, not for Spain. It was local politics, not European technology, that created the conditions for the conquistadors' explosive success. In our reality, Emperor Montezuma II found himself in a very dangerous position, torn between the need to show strength and the fear of making a mistake. Montezuma's hesitation proved fatal. His mystical perception of the newcomers as possible messengers of the gods and his unwillingness to provoke a catastrophe allowed the Spaniards to enter the city without a fight. This was a strategic mistake. The Spaniards gained time to study the empire's system of government, the location of its warehouses, its social structure, and even its religious rituals. The capture of Montezuma as a hostage created an unprecedented crisis of confidence within the elite. Many considered the emperor a prisoner, others an accomplice of the foreigners. The political system, based on respect for the authority of the Tlatoani, cracked. But even so, the Spaniards were on the verge of destruction. Their expulsion on the Night of Sorrow showed that even with allies and European weapons, they were vulnerable and could suffer heavy losses in urban combat. Two key factors unrelated to the strategic genius of the Spaniards accelerated the collapse of the empire: The first was a smallpox epidemic. The disease decimated the population of the Valley of Mexico, undermined the system of government, deprived the army of its commanders, and decided the outcome of the war long before the final assault. The second was political discord among the Aztecs' allies, some of whom chose to switch sides, hoping to benefit from the new order. The whole structure collapsed due to a combination of biological shock, a crisis of confidence, and the enemy's diplomatic game. But what if both factors were removed from the equation? What if the epidemic did not reach the capital or arrive too late? What if Montezuma acted harshly and decisively, not allowing the Spaniards to penetrate the heart of the empire? What if Tlaxcala did not form an alliance with Cortés, but preferred a temporary confederation with the Aztecs against an external enemy? If these parameters change, history takes on a completely different rhythm. The Spaniards would turn from a force of destruction into a small detachment forced to survive among millions of warriors of a huge empire. The conquest could have ended in its infancy, and the fate of the New World could have become one of the most dramatic what-if scenarios in world history. Let us imagine for a moment that in Tlaxcala, the eternal enemy of the Aztecs, the Council of Elders makes a different decision. In our story, they trusted Cortés. But let us suppose that the new Aztec leader, Cuauhtémoc, who replaced the indecisive Moctezuma, offers the Tlaxcalans something more than just a truce. He offers a division of power. Instead of arrogant threats, the ambassadors of Tenochtitlan bring the heads of the first Spaniards and horses killed to Tlaxcala. They prove that these are not gods. They are mortals who have come to take all our gold and land indiscriminately. Today they are with us against you, but tomorrow they will enslave you too. This argument, backed by a promise to end the flower wars and grant trade privileges, shifts the balance. Cortés, who had counted on the support of tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, suddenly finds himself isolated. When the Spaniards approach Tenochtitlan, they see not open dams, but the united army of the Valley of Mexico. Without the support of local resources and guides, the Spanish detachment is deprived of supplies. What if events had unfolded in such a way that the Spaniards were not allowed into the city, but were blocked on the coast? This changes the entire logic of the war. Instead of a city siege, a war of attrition begins in the jungles of Veracruz. The Spaniards, suffering from tropical fevers and food shortages, lose the initiative. The decisive factor is not steel, but logistics. The Aztecs, operating on their own land, simply cut off supply routes, forcing Cortés's expedition into a shameful retreat or death without any divine help. The most terrible enemy of the New World was not the conquistadors, but the diseases they brought with them. Smallpox actually killed Emperor Cuauhtémoc, a talented strategist who could have organized the defense. But what if the concept of quarantine had been applied strictly and ruthlessly? Imagine that the first cases of infection did not cause confusion, but an immediate response based on thousands of years of tradition, of temple discipline, and social control. The Aztecs had a highly developed culture of hygiene and medicine. Their cities were distinguished by a sophisticated sewage system, regular street cleaning, and the use of steam baths, known as temazcal. Noticing that the disease, Tehuazuatl, was spreading through contact with strangers and their belongings, the priest declared it a curse requiring complete isolation. This announcement is perceived not as advice, but as a sacred command from the gods, the violation of which threatens the destruction of the community. Roads are blocked by armed patrols, trade stops, infected villages are burned along with their property, a cruel but effective measure, familiar to Europe at the time, which had survived the Black Death. In this scenario, Cuauhtémoc survives. His survival is critical. It is he, with his leadership experience and military charisma, who is able to unite the scattered chiefs, quell intertribal conflicts, and direct the anger of the people outward, toward outsiders. He maintains a rigid vertical power structure and the authority of the army. Tenochtitlan does not descend into the chaos of anarchy at the most critical moment, as happened historically after the death of several rulers in succession. The population still suffers heavy losses, but they are not total. The aristocracy, the priesthood, and trained warriors, the core of the imperial elite, survive the blow. The survival of this group preserves knowledge, traditions, mechanisms of governance, and most importantly, control over the vassals. The empire does not turn into a headless organism that can be easily torn apart from within. Moreover, having survived the first wave, the population gradually begins to acquire the very collective immunity whose absence doomed them in real history. The second and third waves of the disease are no longer as devastating. By the beginning of the following year, the city has restored part of its population, and active mobilization begins in the provinces. Soldiers receive new instructions related to minimizing contact with foreigners, which makes future clashes with the Spanish more formalized and controlled. Recognizing the threat, the Aztec elite used the crisis to modernize the state apparatus. Temples organized warehouses with food and cloth, developed an evacuation plan in case of a repeat epidemic, and temporary rules were introduced in the city to limit large gatherings of people. This was not modern medicine, but for the 16th century, it was a surprisingly rational system. The price was high, but civilization was not decapitated. The demographic resource, albeit weakened, was still preserved. This made it possible not only to retain power, but also to begin rebuilding the economy, strengthening alliances, and preparing for the inevitable return of the people from the sea. Now the Spaniards will face not a chaotically resisting society, but a much more collected, organized, offended, and united empire threatened by a common danger. After repelling the first attack, a period of intensive analysis and borrowing began. This process had nothing to do with miracles. It was pure pragmatism. Captured weapons, armor, and most importantly, horses fell into the hands of Aztec craftsmen. Metallurgy and weaponry. The Aztecs already knew how to work with gold, silver, and copper. Once they got their hands on steel swords and arquebuses, they couldn't immediately copy the process of hardening steel. That takes decades of experience. However, they understood the principle. Mass production of improved copper and bronze arrowheads capable of piercing light armor began. The traditional macuahuitl, a wooden sword with obsidian blades, is modified. It becomes lighter and longer, and the fighting technique changes from stunning for capturing prisoners to stabbing and chopping for killing. Cavalry. Captured horses are not eaten or sacrificed. They become the empire's most valuable resource. State stud farms are organized in protected mountain valleys. After 20-30 years, the first generation of Aztec horsemen appears. They do not use heavy nightly battering ram tactics. Their style is closer to light cavalry, reconnaissance, quick raids, and archery. Gunpowder. The ingredients for black powder, sulfur, and saltpeter are available in the volcanic region, Popocatépetl. Knowing the principle of operation of captured cannons, Aztec engineers began to experiment. The first models are primitive and dangerous for the gunners. But by the middle of the 16th century, Tenochtitlan acquires its own artillery, which, although inferior to European artillery, is sufficient for defending fortresses. Fortification. The architecture of war changed. Open cities gave way to a system of forts on the coast and at key passes. Walls became lower and thicker to withstand cannonballs. Tenochtitlan's water defenses were reinforced by a fleet of small, maneuverable ships equipped with rams and protective screens against arrows. The repulsion of Cortés' expedition does not stop Spain, but it does slow it down considerably. News of the defeat, stories from surviving sailors, and rumors of a giant, disciplined, and deadly empire where warriors wear cotton armor capable of withstanding the impact of steel arrows dampened the enthusiasm of many adventurers. Stories began to spread in Seville and Cadiz that the land in the west was not easy prey, but a trap where every wrong step led to death. The Spanish crown, preoccupied with Italy, conflicts with France, and the struggle for the Habsburg inheritance, cannot immediately send a huge army as it might have done later. This gives Mesoamerica precious decades, the time of silence, a unique period when the empire can recover, comprehend the threat, and rebuild itself. During this period, the Aztecs began to look beyond the central plateau for the first time in centuries. They realized that the world was much bigger than the Valley of Mexico, and that the impending danger had not disappeared. Cuauhtémoc convenes the Great Council, which includes not only eagle warriors and priests, but also representatives of vassal peoples. A new foreign policy is developed. The only way to survive is not to close oneself off, but to seek out the enemies of one's enemies. Reconnaissance of distant lands begins. Aztec merchants, the Pochteka, accustomed to traveling along secret paths, deliberately reached the coast of the Gulf of Mexico for the first time in search of contact with strangers. There they encounter not the Spanish, but French corsairs and English smugglers who have long been scouring the Caribbean in search of prey. Gradually, a unique symbiosis formed. The European sea rovers needed fresh water, shelter from the Spanish fleet, and places to repair their ships. For the Aztecs, it was vital to obtain iron, tools, steel, cloth, new woodworking technologies, and information about politics in Europe. The first secret harbors appear, settlements on the coast that were officially considered deserted, but in fact became trading hubs. French captains gladly exchanged muskets and steel arrowheads for gold, cocoa, and exotic dyes, knowing full well that these weapons would ultimately be used against Spain. The English supplied knives, saws, cloth, glass, and even primitive firearms. By the 1550s, Mesoamerica was no longer an isolated world. The imperial court received information about the European balance of power, about the struggle between the Habsburgs and the Valois, about the emerging naval power of England, about the religious wars tearing the continent apart. The honorable men effectively became diplomats. The first attempts were made to send emissaries across the ocean, perhaps secretly, perhaps under the guise of strange merchants at the court of the French King Francis III. Although such trips remained rare, the very idea of international relations became part of the empire's strategy. Spain, meanwhile, faces a new nightmare. Instead of weak, disunited tribes across the ocean, there are fortified, armed states trained by Europeans. The Caribbean is filled with ships of corsairs based in a land that the Spanish considered their sphere of influence. In the same region where New Spain was supposed to emerge, a powerful enemy is now forming, supported by Spain's European competitors. The maps are being redrawn. The future colony is being replaced by a stable, central, and recognized power: the Mexican Empire. Spain can no longer claim unchallenged dominance. Mesoamerica is becoming the main barrier to European expansion. The external threat inevitably transforms the internal structure of society. The traditional religion, which required mass human sacrifices to maintain the movement of the sun, faces a pragmatic crisis. Endlessly killing prisoners and one's own citizens means depriving oneself of the soldiers and workers needed for defense. A religious reform takes place from above. The priestly elite, under pressure from the military nobility, now including the Tlaxcalans, revises its dogmas. It is announced that the gods have had their fill of blood during the years of great battles. Now, Huitzilopochtli demands a different kind of service: iron, gunpowder, and the defense of sacred land. Sacrifices do not disappear completely, but become rare, symbolic acts, the execution of criminals or particularly important enemies. The freed-up energy is directed towards creation. Social mobility opens up. A warrior's status now depends not on the number of prisoners captured, but on his skill with an arquebus or a horse. The economy is also changing. The introduction of draft animals, oxen and mules purchased from smugglers, and wheeled transport revolutionizes logistics. Food can now be delivered faster and in larger quantities. The population is growing. Iron mining on an industrial scale begins. Schools, Kalmakak, which previously trained only priests and warriors, now teach engineers, translators, and navigators. Let's compare the known outcome with a possible alternative. In reality, the culture of indigenous peoples was suppressed, temples were destroyed, and languages became secondary. In this world, cultural synthesis is taking place, but on the terms of the landowners. Instead of the Inquisition and total conversion to a new faith, the empire chooses the path of adaptation, not subjugation, but absorption. The Spaniards, finding themselves in the minority and dependent on the mercy of the Tlatoani, are forced to live by the rules of the Aztec court, contributing their own elements to the existing civilization rather than destroying it. The architecture of Tenochtitlan changed. Pyramids stood side by side with stone bastion-type forts. Canals were widened to allow larger ships to pass through. Neighborhoods for foreign guests appeared. Trading posts for French and Dutch merchants who lived according to the laws of the empire. In exchange for trading privileges, they teach local craftsmen European methods of construction, artillery, and shipbuilding. The city gradually transforms into a mixture of Venice, Seville, and the ancient Aztec capital, retaining its uniqueness but growing in breadth and height. Agriculture is booming. The Aztecs adopt pig and chicken farming, which solves the problem of protein deficiency. New crops, wheat, sugarcane, are grown alongside corn, but not on plantations with slave labor for export, but for domestic consumption and trade. Irrigation systems and drainage are improved, and the first state grain stores are created. The rural economy becomes more sustainable, allowing the empire to withstand crop failures, rainy seasons, and droughts much better than before. The Nahuatl language becomes the lingua franca for all of North and Central America. The Latin alphabet is adapted for writing Nahuatl, creating a rich written culture, chronicles, treatises on medicine and astronomy, poetry. A unique literature emerges, neither Spanish nor indigenous, but a new Mexican literature, where epic songs coexist with chronicles of European voyages. The schools of Calmecac and Tulpamacali introduce elements of European grammar and logic, becoming centers of mixed education. Christianity penetrated the country, but not as the religion of the conquerors, but as one of many teachings. A syncretic cult emerged. Christ could be perceived as one of the hypostases of Quetzalcoatl, a god who suffered for the sake of humanity. Missionaries, realizing the futility of aggressive treatment, adapt worship services to local traditions. Crucifixes in the form of feathered serpents appear. Christian holidays are combined with Mesoamerican rituals. As a result, one religion does not absorb the other, but merges with it, forming a unique spiritual system. Over time, the Mexican Empire began to see itself not only as a military power, but also as a cultural center. Scientists from Europe came to Tenochtitlan, attracted by the opportunity to study unknown plants, animals, and astronomical traditions. Local priests and sages engage in debates with them, creating a scientific dialogue that Europe lost for centuries in real history due to the colonial tragedy. And by the end of the 16th century, the world did not receive an oppressed civilization, but a confident alternative power, with its own writing, religion, diplomacy, and worldview. In this reality, America did not become Europe's new world. It became an equal partner and a new pole of power. Let's look 500 years into the future. By the 19th century, the Mexican Empire, or the Anahuac Confederation, is an industrial power stretching from modern-day Texas to Panama. It has avoided the fate of a colony and retained control over its resources. In this world, the United States faces not a weakened, fragmented republic in the South, but a powerful unitary monarchy or oligarchic republic with a modern army and navy. The War of 1846 either does not happen or has a completely different outcome. The border runs much further north. Culturally, this region is a unique fusion. It is a country where skyscrapers are decorated with Toltec-style ornaments, where the Constitution is written in Nahuatl and Spanish-French, and where the state philosophy is based on concepts of duty and collective responsibility inherited from ancestors. The world does not know Latin America as we understand it. There is Indian America, a sovereign civilizational pole that, on a par with China and Japan, has proven that modernization is possible without losing identity. Economic centers have shifted. Veracruz and Acapulco are major ports of world trade, connecting Europe and Asia via an isthmus controlled by a local power rather than external forces. The history we have examined demonstrates the power of adaptation and the role of chance. One successful diplomatic agreement, one timely quarantine measure, and a great tragedy turns into a great triumph. Instead of becoming a raw materials appendage of Europe, Mesoamerica could have become a partner and rival, preserving its unique culture and enriching humanity with it, not through museum exhibits, but through a living state tradition. The world would be more complex, multifaceted, and perhaps more balanced. Subscribe so you don't miss new versions of history